The reservation was for 7 o'clock. By 7:43, the maitre d' had passed her table 4 times. Each pass was slightly slower than the last. A professional hovering calibrated to suggest, without stating outright, that the evening had reached a natural conclusion. Mara noticed. She was practiced at noticing things that were meant to go unnoticed. The restaurant was the kind of place that hummed with the performance of a certain kind of evening. Candlelight arranged to flatter, wine lists designed to signal, conversation pitched 2 notes above where it would land naturally. The couple at the table to her left had been studying their menus for 20 minutes without ordering. The man at the bar had checked his reflection in the mirror behind the bottles 3 times in the last 10. Everyone in this room was performing something. Mara Whitfield was performing patience. She was good at it. It was one of the first things people learned about her. Not from her, but from those who had sat across from her in conference rooms and underestimated the stillness. They had mistaken it for inattention. They had not made that mistake twice. The table held 2 glasses of water, one touched and one untouched, a bread basket she hadn't opened, and her phone, face down, which was unusual. She had turned it face down approximately 4 minutes after sitting down, a deliberate act, the kind that required a specific decision rather than a habit. She was trying to be here, in this restaurant, at this table, on a Tuesday evening in September, waiting for a man she had never met. She was not certain anymore why she was still waiting. 43 minutes. She had nearly left twice. The first time, at minute 22, when the maitre d' had leaned in with an expression of careful, practiced sympathy to say, "Madam, I can have the table cleared if you'd prefer," and she had looked at him with the same expression she used in board meetings when someone interrupted her mid-sentence, and said quietly, "I'm fine, thank you," and he had retreated. The second time, at minute 38, when the man at the bar, mid-40s, good suit, the kind of confidence that sat slightly too high on the body, had caught her eye and raised his glass in the specific way that was an opening rather than a greeting, and she had picked up her phone and looked at the screen to have something to look at, and had found herself reading for the 3rd time the message that had arrived at 7:19. "I'm so sorry. Sophia had an asthma attack at school. She's stable now. At urgent care, my sister is with her. I'm 20 minutes away, and I understand completely if you've left. I would have. I'm sorry to have wasted your evening. There was no performance in it. No charm. No carefully constructed, I was held up excuse with a flattering story attached. Just the facts, the apology, and the acknowledgement that she had every right to be gone." She had read it and set the phone face down and stayed. She had not examined this decision too closely. Mara Whitfield was, in many respects, a woman who examined everything: quarterly projections, organizational hierarchies, the load-bearing assumptions buried in other people's proposals. She examined most decisions the way an engineer examines a bridge, looking for the failure points before committing any weight to it. But this one she had let stand without inspection. She had stayed because of a message that had not tried to make her stay. She was still considering what that meant when the door opened at 7:44 and a man walked in. If this story is already pulling at something in you, hit the like button and subscribe to Quiet Kind, and drop a comment below telling me where in the world you're watching from. He was just a single dad. No one saw him coming. Keep watching. He was not what she had pictured. She had not pictured anything specific. She was disciplined enough to know better than that. But the residual image that existed in the place where specific images weren't had involved someone who looked prepared. Someone who had chosen his evening carefully. This man had not had time to change his shirt. It was a good shirt, clean, collared, the kind of blue that sits between navy and gray. But it was a work shirt, the sleeves rolled to the elbow in the way that happens when a day requires it and there's no time to roll them back. He was carrying a jacket over one arm. His hair was damp at the temples, which meant he had stopped somewhere briefly to wash his face and run water through it, and that was the extent of what he had managed. He was perhaps 38, though the evening had probably added a few years. He had the particular look of a man who had been running on the inside for several hours and had only just stopped. He scanned a room the way people scan rooms when they're looking for something they're not sure is still there. The maitre d' materialized. There was a quiet exchange. She watched the maitre d' gesture toward the door and watched the man's face do something she recognized, The microcompression of someone who has anticipated this possibility and prepared for it, who knows that in his current state he is not what this room expects, and who has already decided he will accept that verdict without argument. She stood up. She did it without planning. One moment she was seated, and the next she was on her feet, and she said, at a volume that carried cleanly across the 12 feet between them, "He's with me." The maitre d' turned. The man at the bar turned. 3 people at adjacent tables turned. The man in the work shirt turned last, and when he found her face, he held very still for a moment. Then he said, "I'm Daniel." And she said, "I know. Come sit down." His name was Daniel Reyes, and he had been a civil engineer for 11 years before he became the kind of man who showed up late to blind dates in damp work shirts. He had loved the work. That was the first thing to understand about him. Not that he had done it, but that he had genuinely loved it. The specific pleasure of load calculations done correctly, of looking at a set of drawings and knowing exactly where the stress would go. He had been the kind of engineer that other engineers called when something wasn't adding up, the one who could walk a construction site and find the problem before it became a crisis. His firm had been mid-sized, well-regarded, the kind of place that did good work without advertising it. He had met Anna at a professional conference in Phoenix. She was presenting research on sustainable building materials. He had asked a question after her talk that she told him later was the smartest question of the day, and also the one she at least wanted to answer, and he had said, "I'll settle for one." They had gotten dinner that evening and talked until the restaurant closed around them. Ana Reyes had been quick and methodical and funny in the deadpan way of people who grew up around serious people and learned to locate the absurdity in things. She had taught Daniel to make proper coffee and to stop eating dinner in front of his laptop and to notice when he was stressed before he had been stressed for 3 weeks and couldn't sleep. She had been his best at it, the thing that made everything he did sharper and truer than it would have been on its own. Sophia was born in November, a cold and clear night that Daniel spent in a hospital chair with Anna's hand in both of his, watching the monitors with the vigilance of someone who knew how to read systems for failure points. Sophia arrived without incident, red-faced and decisive, and looked at him with a focused, uncategorizable expression of someone who has made a choice about where to direct her attention and has chosen him. 3 years after that, Anna was diagnosed. The illness was aggressive and fast, and it did not care about the particular shape of what it was dismantling. Daniel kept working for the first 4 months, because working was the thing he knew how to do, and because Anna had insisted, and because stopping would have required acknowledging what there was to stop for. Then Sophia developed a fever that would not break, and he had taken her to urgent care at midnight and sat with her in the waiting room for an hour before someone called their name, and he had understood, with the specific clarity that arrives at midnight under fluorescent light, that he could not be in 2 places at once, that he had to choose which place mattered most. He chose. He left the firm with a reference that described him as the most thorough structural mind they had worked with and a handshake that the senior partner held for a beat too long. He took a position as a building inspector with the city, lower title, lower pay, the kind of work that kept him on predictable hours and within driving distance of Sophia's school. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself a lot of things in those years that were true in the way that things are true when you need them to be. Anna died 16 months later, on a Tuesday morning in April, with Daniel on one side of the bed and Sophia, asleep on the other, having crept in at some point in the small hours. She was 3. She would not remember the morning. She would carry it anyway, in the way that children carry things their minds haven't yet organized in a memory, but their bodies already know. That was 4 years ago. Sophia was 7 now. She went to Lakeview Elementary, where she was known for 3 things: her capacity for sustained focus on any subject that interested her, her frank assessment of situations that adults were being diplomatic about, and a small white rescue cat named Potato, who was technically not allowed in the apartment, but whom the building manager, Mrs. Capoletti, had made an exception for after Sophia explained that Potato had been abandoned, and that abandonment was very hard on cats. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building in Bridgeton. It had 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled of coffee in the mornings, and a table where Daniel did the crossword puzzle on weekend mornings while Sophia worked on whatever project was currently occupying her. Last month, a scale model of the solar system. This month, a field guide to local birds, she was illustrating herself, with a dedication on the title page that read, "To Dad, who always listens." He had not dated in 4 years. He had not thought much about it. Or rather, he had thought about it the way you think about something you have placed in a high cabinet. Aware it is there, not quite ready to reach for it. His sister Graciela had been making increasingly direct comments for about a year. His co-worker Marcus, who was married and seemed to find contentment in wanting everyone around him to be similarly arranged, had been even more direct. The blind date had been Graciela's doing. "She's someone I know through the board," she had said, with the vague specificity she used when she didn't want him asking too many questions. "She's private. She's serious. She has a good sense of humor, and she specifically asked to use just her first name on the profile because she's had issues with men who Google too much." Daniel had not Googled. He had made a reservation at a restaurant he could not entirely afford and bought a shirt that was nicer than his usual rotation and arranged for Graciela to pick up Sophia after school and told himself it was just dinner, nothing more, and had believed himself until 3:47 in the afternoon when the call came from the school nurse. The next 45 minutes were the particular kind of chaos that parents of children with respiratory conditions knew in their bones. The measured speed, the controlled voice on the phone while his insides ran at a different frequency entirely. The urgent care waiting room with its plastic chairs and its television cycling through weather, Sophia pale and small in the chair beside him, her breathing ragged and then steadier as the treatment worked, her hand in his, her face-to-face that always brought him back to exactly where he was. "Daddy, you smell like outside." "I was in a hurry, Bug." "You were coming from somewhere?" "I was going somewhere. Actually, somewhere else." She had looked at him with the assessing expression she had inherited directly from Anna. "Did you miss it?" He had thought about the text he'd sent and the silence that had answered it, which was entirely reasonable. "Probably." She considered this for a moment, her head tipped against his shoulder. "That's sad. Was it important?" "Not as important as you." Another pause. Then, very quietly, "You should still try again. Important things are worth trying again." He had held that on the drive across the city, his sister's voice on the phone saying, "Go, Daniel, I've got her." Sophia already half asleep in the back seat, her breathing smooth, and even now. He had found a parking garage 3 blocks from the restaurant and run the distance in the September night air and pushed through the door at 7:44 with the specific feeling of a man who has arrived after the house lights have gone down. He had expected an empty table. She was not what he had expected either. He had received no photograph. She had been specific about that, per Graciela, something about preferring the actual meeting to the managed impression. So he had no image to search for. What he found was a woman at a corner table who had clearly been there long enough for the water glass at the empty seat to still be full, who was wearing something dark and understated, and who stood up when the maitre d' began his quiet redirection and said, across 12 feet of softly lit restaurant, in a voice that required no effort to carry, "He's with me." He understood later that he should have felt relieved. In the moment, what he felt was something harder to name, the specific disorientation of being claimed by someone you have never met, in a room where you were about to be turned away. He sat down. She sat down. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The maitre d' reappeared with a grace that suggested he had seen stranger things and handed Daniel a menu. "I'm Daniel." "I know. I'm Mara." She looked at him steadily. "You don't have to apologize again." He had intended to. He had been composing versions of it in the car. He set them down. "Okay. She's really all right?" He looked at her. "Sophia." "Yes. She's with my sister. She's had this condition since she was 4. We have a protocol. She's fine." He said it the way parents say, "she's fine," with the particular firmness of someone who has learned to mean it. Mara nodded once. She did not ask follow-up questions. She did not perform concern. She simply received the information and let it settle, which was, he would think about later, exactly the right thing to do. "You should eat something," she said. "You look like you haven't." He hadn't. He couldn't remember lunch. "The bread's probably cold." "The bread is fine." She pushed the basket toward him. "I didn't touch it." He took a piece. It was not cold. They ordered. He got whatever the server suggested. He hadn't looked at the menu carefully enough to have preferences and didn't pretend otherwise. She ordered without consulting the menu, which meant she either knew the restaurant or didn't particularly care what she ate, and he couldn't yet tell which. Graciela said, "You're in urban planning," she said. "Building inspection, mostly. I was engineer before civil. I stepped back when my wife was sick." He said it plainly, without the softening he sometimes added for people who didn't know. Graciela had presumably prepared her. "And you're in management at a tech company." Something moved briefly across her face. Something like that. She had good posture and a directness about her that suggested she was accustomed to rooms where what she said determined what happened next. She was approximately his age, though there was a quality of composed weariness about her that was harder to date, the kind that came from carrying responsibility for a long time, not from years alone. Her hands were around her water glass. She was not performing composure. She was simply composed, which was different. He had met enough people who performed it to know the tells, the careful positioning, the practiced ease. This was something that had become structural in her, the way a habit becomes posture. "Why did you stay?" he asked. She looked at him. "Your message." He waited. "Most people apologize because they want to be forgiven," she said. "You apologized because you thought it was owed. You weren't asking for anything." He considered that. It wasn't how he had experienced the message. He had sent it because it was true and she deserved the truth, which was a simpler calculus than she was describing. But he understood what she was pointing at. 43 minutes is a long time to wait, he said. "I've waited longer for things that mattered less." She said it quietly, not dramatically. It was the kind of sentence that came from somewhere specific, and he didn't press it. The food arrived. He ate, and was surprised by how hungry he was, and said so. And she smiled, just slightly. The controlled kind that suggested smiling was something she did less automatically than most people. It reached her eyes for a moment, and then it was gone, and he thought about how a person learned to keep an expression that contained itself. "Sophia," she said. "How old?" "7. Going on 45. He reached into his jacket pocket. Reflex, the same reason he never put the keychain anywhere else, and set his phone on the table. The lock screen was Sophia from last Christmas, grinning widely in front of a tree she had decorated with a mathematical precision that could only have been deliberate, every ornament exactly spaced. "She told me I should still come tonight. After urgent care. She said important things are worth trying again." Mara looked at the photo for a moment, a beat longer than polite interest. Something in her expression shifted in a way he could not quite read. "She's right," Mara said. "She usually is." He picked up his phone. "She gets that from her mother." A small silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind that two people with histories allow each other. "What was she like?" Mara asked. He looked at her. The question, asked that way, past tense, direct, no protective softening, was the question of someone who understood that grief was a fact rather than a wound that required constant handling. "Precise," he said. She had no patience for vague. He paused. "She would have asked you what you actually do by the second course." Mara's mouth curved. She would have gotten an answer. She always did. Outside the restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows, the city moved through its September rhythm, warm enough still for outdoor tables, the light going amber at the edges of the buildings. A couple passed with a stroller, the baby's head lolling at the angle of deep sleep. A man in a delivery uniform moved efficiently through the pedestrian current, a stack of packages balanced against one shoulder. Daniel watched the street, because he had the kind of attention that noticed what moved through the margins of things. It was part of what had made him a good engineer, not the calculations, which anyone could learn, but the habit of looking where most people didn't. The corner where water would collect. The joint that carried more than it appeared to. He had never entirely turned this off. He noticed that Mara had relaxed by approximately 15 degrees since they sat down. Not much. Enough. The set of her shoulders had shifted from the careful horizontal of a woman managing how she occupied a room to something that was still upright, still composed, but less deliberate. The way a lock releases when the right key is tried. Not thrown open, just disengaged. He noticed that she refilled her own water glass and then, without making it a gesture, refilled his. He noticed that she had not once looked at her phone. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Yes." "Why no photograph on the profile?" She considered this for a moment, the same weighing expression she'd used when ordering, the consideration of someone who chooses carefully what to put on the table. "Because I wanted whoever showed up to have shown up for the right reasons." A pause. "I've had experiences where the expectation preceded the person." He understood that. He didn't say he understood it, because sometimes understanding and saying it were different things. "And the name," he said. "Just Mara." "Same reason." "Fair enough." The food was almost gone. The restaurant had settled into its later rhythm. Fewer new arrivals, longer silences between conversations, the particular softening of a room that has peaked. The man at the bar had stopped watching the mirror. The couple to the left had finally ordered. "What do you inspect?" she asked. "Depends on the project. Mostly commercial. New construction, some renovation. Making sure the structural components match the drawings. That the work is sound." He set down his fork. "There's a building on Meridian Street right now, 17 stories, mixed use. The developer's been pushing the timeline, and the steel on the 4th floor doesn't." He stopped. "Sorry, it's not interesting." "It's interesting," she said. She said it with the quality of someone for whom interesting things were a form of value rather than a social courtesy. He looked at her for a moment. "The steel on the 4th floor doesn't sit flush with the specifications. The deviation is within tolerance on paper. But the load distribution over time," he paused. "Buildings are long-term propositions. You have to think about them the way they'll be, not just the way they are." Mara was watching him with an expression he couldn't immediately categorize. Not the polite interest of someone waiting for a subject to change. Something more focused. "Meridian Street," she said. "You know it." A brief pause. "I know the area." She looked at her water glass. "Who's the developer?" "Castellan Group." She said nothing. Her expression remained exactly what it had been, which was itself a kind of information. He filed it without drawing conclusions. The check arrived. Daniel reached for it out of reflex, the same automatic move that made him hold doors and look for the problem in any system he encountered, and Mara's hand came out and rested briefly on the corner of the check folder. Not grabbing, just present. "Split it," she said. "I was late. You had a reason." "That's—" "Split it," she said again, and it was not an argument. It was the tone of someone who had decided, which was different from the tone of someone who was still deciding. He let her. They stood outside the restaurant in the September evening. The air was cooler now, carrying the particular smell of a city at night. Exhaust and something green from the park 2 blocks over, and, faintly, food from the kitchen vents of the building next door. She had a car coming. He had walked from the parking garage. "Sophia's project," he said, and didn't entirely know why he was saying it. "The birds. She's been working on it for 3 weeks. A field guide, illustrating it herself." He stopped. "I don't know why I told you that." "Because you've been thinking about it," she said, "since you left the hospital." Not unkindly, just accurately. "She's everything I'm doing this right for." Mara looked at him. The street light caught the edge of her face, and she looked, for a moment, like someone who had set down something heavy and was surprised by how her hands felt without it. "I have to ask you something," she said. "Okay. The building on Meridian. If the steel is off, what does that mean for the people who go in it?" He looked at her. It was a strange question and a very specific one, and he answered it directly because she had asked directly. "Nothing immediate. Over 10, 15 years, possibly something. The deviation compounds under load. You wouldn't see it until it was already." He stopped. "What?" A dark car pulled up at the curb. A driver who didn't look in the rearview mirror. She looked at it, then back at him. "Because I'm going to be in that building," she said. "Professionally. Very soon." He watched her face. She was telling him something and not telling him something, and both things were true at once. "What kind of management?" he said slowly. The ghost of something, not quite a smile, but a near relation of one, moved across her expression. "The complicated kind," she said. She got in the car. He stood on the sidewalk in his work shirt and watched it merge into the traffic, and he thought about steel on a 4th floor that didn't sit flush, and a woman who had waited 43 minutes and refilled his water glass without making it a gesture, and Sophia at home, telling him important things were worth trying again. He walked back to the parking garage through the September dark. He didn't Google anything when he got home, but he did pull up the structural drawings for the Meridian Street project and sit at the kitchen table with his coffee. And he looked at the fourth floor calculations for a long time, and what he found there, in the numbers that had been bothering him for 3 weeks, looking at them now with a sharpened attention, was a problem larger than he had initially understood, and a problem that someone in that building was going to need to know about. He filed the formal report on a Thursday. It was 6 pages, single-spaced, with annotated drawings attached and a summary paragraph at the top that said what 6 pages of technical language was designed to say without alarming anyone. This requires correction before the project advances to the next phase. He had written it carefully, the way he wrote everything, not to impress, but to be accurate. Accuracy was the only version of honesty available to him in that particular language. His supervisor, a man named Brandt who had been with the city for 22 years and had the particular fatigue of someone who had stopped expecting things to go well, read the report, set it down, and said, "You know who owns that project? Castellan Group. And you know who Castellan's primary investor is?" Daniel looked at him. "Whitfield Capital," Brandt said. He said the way people say things they wish they didn't know. Daniel drove home through Thursday evening traffic with the report in his bag and Brandt's voice in his head and the memory of a woman standing on a sidewalk in September dark saying the complicated kind. He had not spoken to her since the dinner. He had her number, exchanged at the end of the evening, the practical kind of exchange, not the hopeful kind, though he was no longer entirely sure of the difference. He had looked at it twice without calling. He called her on Friday morning from the parking lot of Sophia's school, after drop-off, with the engine running. She answered on the second ring. "Daniel, you knew," he said. "A beat. I suspected. About the building. About why it might matter that you knew it." Her voice was measured, the professional register. "I didn't know about the structural issue. I knew we had an interest in the project. I knew there were questions about how Castellan was managing the timeline. I was there to evaluate. And the blind date was a blind date," she said. "Graciela didn't know what I do. I didn't know what you do." That was a pause. That was coincidence. If you're asking whether I engineered it, he believed her. He knew what engineered sounded like. This didn't. "My report goes to Castellan Monday," he said. "They'll push back. They always push back. And when they find out who's asking, Daniel, they'll go around me. Call Brandt. Call someone above Brandt. Daniel." Her voice had shifted. "Let me see the report. You have a financial interest in the building. I have a financial interest in buildings that don't fall down." A pause. "Let me see the report." He sent it Friday afternoon. She called back in 40 minutes. "The deviation on the fourth floor beam cluster," she said. No preamble. "It's not tolerance drift. It's a substitution." He went still. "What kind of substitution?" "Grade 50 spec, grade 36 installed. The invoice discrepancy has been in our audit trail for 2 months. We flagged it as a procurement anomaly. We didn't connect it to the drawings." A pause, and in it he could hear the specific quality of a person who is recalibrating. "I've been looking at the wrong number. Mara, I know what this means. Tell me what you think it means." "It means someone at Castellan knowingly substituted substandard material and file documentation stating otherwise." Her voice was flat and precise and contained something beneath it that was not flat at all. "It means the building, as currently constructed, does not meet the specifications our capital is secured against. It means," she stopped, "it means I have been signing off on quarterly reviews of a project that is fraudulent." He was quiet. "I didn't know," she said. Not defensively. Simply, "I know you didn't. You can't know that. I know what you sound like when something surprises you." He hadn't meant to say that. It was true, but he hadn't meant to offer it. "You went still at the restaurant when I mentioned Castellan. You didn't go still the way people go still when they're managing a reaction. You went still the way people go still when something connects that they didn't expect to connect." A long silence. "Who else have you told?" she asked. "Brandt. The report goes on record Monday, regardless." "Good." Another pause. "Don't let them delay it." "I wasn't planning to." They met the following Saturday. She had suggested it, text rather than call. "Sophia's welcome if you don't have someone to leave her with. and he had read that twice, the same way he'd read the first message she'd sent. Looking for the thing beneath the thing, and finding it simpler than he expected. They met at a park on the east side of the city, the kind that had been there long enough to have large trees and worn paths, where a person with a 7-year-old could go without it requiring explanation. Daniel arrived first, Sophia walking beside him in her field guide phase, notebook tucked under one arm, her eyes moving to the tree canopy with the focused attention of a naturalist who has decided this is the work. "There's a yellow warbler," she said. 11 o'clock. "I see it. You're not looking. I'm looking at you looking." She made the expression that was Anna's expression, the one that said you were being deliberately impossible and I love you anyway, and returned to the canopy. Mara came from the south entrance wearing flat shoes and a coat she had clearly grabbed rather than selected. Her hair was down, the same as the Tuesday night he'd stood on the sidewalk watching her car pull away. She looked different in daylight, the same composed erectness, but less armored. The way a building looks different when the scaffolding is gone. Sophia saw her before Daniel said anything. Sophia saw most things before they were announced. "Is that her?" "Yes." She walks like she knows where she's going. She does. Sophia considered this for a moment with the seriousness she applied to all assessments. "I'm going to tell her about the warbler," she said. "If she's not interested, that's information." Mara was interested in the warbler. She was not performatively interested, not the adult-to-child version of interest that required crouching down and widening the eyes. She asked where Sophia had spotted it and looked at the tree with the same focus she applied to things that mattered, and then said, "Is it nesting?" Sophia stared at her. Most people don't ask about nesting. Most people are not looking at the right things. Something in Sophia's expression shifted, the small recalibration of a person who has updated a prior assumption. She opened the field guide and found the page for warblers, pointing to the illustration she had made herself, small, precise, the wings cross-hatched in pencil. "You drew this," Mara said. "I'm illustrating the whole guide. I'm on page 31. "What's on page 30? "The cedar waxwing. But the one I drew doesn't look right yet. The crest is too tall." "Show me." Sophia showed her. Mara looked at it seriously, tilted the notebook, looked at the tree line as though locating a reference. "The angle on the beak is right. The crest, maybe look at it from slightly below. They perch high. You're drawing it at eye level." Sophia looked at her. Then she looked at the drawing. Then she looked back at Mara. "How do you know what a cedar waxwing looks like?" "I had a house when I was young with a cedar waxwing that came every November. I knew him very well. You can't know a bird individually." "I know. I knew him anyway." Sophia absorbed this. She wrote something in a margin of the field guide with the stub of pencil she kept behind her ear. Daniel, standing slightly back, watched his daughter write a note about cedar waxwing crests as though she had been given peer-reviewed data, and felt something move in his chest that he did not immediately try to name. They sat on a bench while Sophia moved in careful, spiraling circles around the tree canopy, field guide open, pencil moving. "She's extraordinary," Mara said. "She's 7. That's what I mean." He looked at Sophia, the total concentration, the notebook held exactly level, the way she moved with the slight forward lean of someone following something that matters. "She makes things make sense," he said. "When I stopped knowing what the work was for, she was what it was for. She still is." Mara was quiet for a moment. There was a quality to her silences that he was beginning to understand. They were not empty. They were the silences of someone who had spent a long time in rooms where silence was read as weakness, and who had learned to hold it anyway. "The Castellan situation is going to get complicated," she said. "I know. They have lawyers. They have people whose job it is to make inspectors question their findings. I know what my findings are." "I know you do." She looked at the path in front of them. "I'm going to make it harder for them to do that. I'm pulling Whitfield Capital's position from the project. It triggers a covenant clause that puts the financing under review." He turned to look at her. "That's significant. It's what's right." She said it simply. "We were funding a fraud. That ends. It will cost you. The alternative costs more." She said in the way she said most things, not for effect, but because it was the accurate statement of the situation. I built something that people depend on. I didn't build it to put my name on a building that isn't sound. He looked at her for a long moment, at the carefully maintained composure, at the place behind the composure where something else lived, something that had been watching its own edges for a long time, making sure they held. "What do you actually do?" he said. "Not the management version." She looked at the path. "I run a capital investment firm, Whitfield Capital. We fund infrastructure projects, buildings, transit, public works. Mostly urban. Mostly things people use every day without knowing who paid for them." She paused. "I started 11 years ago with a bridge loan and one client in an office that smelled like the previous tenant's lunch." He was quiet. "I'm very good at it," she said, "and I've been very careful. And someone at Castellan took advantage of that care by hiding things in the places I trusted them to maintain. That's not your fault." "No," she said, "but it is my responsibility." He thought about the report on his desk, the 6 pages, the annotated drawings, the 4th floor that didn't match the specifications and hadn't matched them for months, while everyone above him chose not to look too closely. He thought about Brandt's face when he'd said Whitfield Capital, the assumption that a name like that would change what the steel said. "They're going to come at the report," he said. "Let them. They'll question my methodology. My record." "Your record is clean." She turned to look at him. "I checked." He looked at her. "When?" "Before the dinner." She held his gaze without apology. "I told you I don't use photographs because I don't want to be pre-evaluated. That doesn't mean I'm naive. Graciela told me you were a single father with a good heart. I confirmed there was no reason to doubt her. That's a clinical way to describe it. It's an honest one." He looked back at Sophia, who had stopped walking and was standing very still beneath a tree, looking up, pencil suspended above the notebook, waiting for the bird to settle, patient in the way she had been patient from the beginning, the complete, unhurried attention of someone who understood that some things revealed themselves only when you stopped demanding they hurry. "I'm going to lose the Meridian project," he said. "The inspection contract. When Castellan finds out, I won't back down. Probably. That's a significant portion of this quarter's income. I know. I have a 7-year-old with a respiratory condition and a field guide on page 31. "I know, Daniel." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to file the report anyway." "I know that too," she said. And the way she said it, not as a compliment, not as a reward, but as a simple recognition of a fact she had already understood, was the most direct thing anyone had said to him in a long time. Sophia lowered her pencil and looked back at them from across the path. "Yellow-rumped warbler," she called. "Second branch. I got the crest right this time." Mara cupped her hands around her mouth. "Show me when you're done." Sophia nodded, serious as a scientist, and turned back to the tree. Monday morning, Daniel filed the report. By Monday afternoon, Castellan Group's legal team had contacted Brandt. By Tuesday, Brandt had called Daniel into his office with the look of a man trapped between 2 things he didn't want to choose between. By Wednesday, Daniel had a certified letter questioning the validity of his methodology and suggesting a second inspection by a firm that, when he looked it up, had done previous work contracted by Castellan. By Thursday morning, the story had changed. Because Thursday morning, Whitfield Capital issued a press statement announcing the withdrawal of investment from the Meridian Street project, citing concerns regarding material specification compliance and the integrity of construction documentation. The statement used no dramatic language. It didn't need to. The language of capital moving was its own kind of statement, quiet, irreversible, and heard in every room that mattered. Daniel read it at his kitchen table before Sophia woke up, with his coffee going cold beside him. He read it twice. Then he looked up the name on the statement. Mara Whitfield, Chief Executive Officer, Whitfield Capital. Below the name, a photo, the kind used in annual reports, professional, composed, exactly what he expected. He sat with that for a moment. The specific feeling of a door opening to show you a room you had been in before from a different angle. He picked up his phone. He set it down. He picked it up again. Her text arrived before he could send his. "The statement is out. Your report stands on its own. Don't let them tell you otherwise." He looked at it for a moment. Then he typed, "You didn't have to do that." Her reply came quickly. "I know. That's why it matters. He put the phone in his pocket and went to wake Sophia up for school. And in the kitchen, while he made her toast, and she appeared in the doorway in her socks with potato under one arm and her field guide under the other, he thought about a building on Meridian Street that didn't match its own specifications, and a woman who had pulled her name off it because it was the accurate thing to do, and a specific feeling of standing next to someone who made the same calculation you made. The one where what's right and what's costly were the same number, and you paid it anyway. Dad, Sophia said, setting Potato down on the chair with the careful placement of someone who takes handoff seriously. You have the face. What face? The face where you're thinking about something, and it's good, but you're not sure yet. He set the toast in front of her. Eat your breakfast. She ate her breakfast. She didn't push it. She had her mother's instinct for the things that needed time and her father's patience. And she applied both of them now with the ease of someone who has always known that some things reveal themselves when you stop demanding they hurry. Outside, the city moved through its Thursday rhythm. Somewhere on Meridian Street, a building stood with steel in its fourth floor that didn't match the drawings. Somewhere in an office with a view Daniel hadn't seen yet, a woman named Mara Whitfield was making the next call. And in a third-floor apartment in Bridgeton, a single father made his daughter's lunch and packed it the night before, because that was what the mornings required. In the lunchbox, he tucked a folded note, the way he always did, a small square of paper with something on it that he knew she would read at the lunch table and fold in her pocket because she was 7 years old and kept everything her father gave her. And he was the kind of man who knew that the small things were not small. The note said, "Important things are worth trying again." He had borrowed it from her. He thought she wouldn't mind. The second inspection happened on a Friday. Castellan had pushed for it with the specific force of people who believe that pushing hard enough reshapes reality. The firm they brought in, Meridian Structural Consultants, a name that Daniel noted with quiet irony, arrived with 3 engineers and a project manager who introduced himself with the handshake of a man who had already written his conclusion. Daniel was there because it was his report. He was permitted to observe. He stood at the edge of the 4th floor with his hands in his jacket pockets and watched 3 engineers look at steel that did not meet its own specifications, and he waited. The project manager's name was Hollis. He moved through the floor with the practiced confidence of someone being paid to find a particular answer. He asked Daniel twice about his measurement methodology, and both times Daniel answered in the patient, precise way of someone who has been asked this before and whose answer does not change. The third time, Hollis stopped pretending. "Mr. Reyes, the deviation here is within an acceptable range for construction variance. Grade 36 steel installed where grade 50 was specified is not a variance," Daniel said. "It's a substitution. The documentation filed states grade 50. The material installed is not grade 50. Your testing methodology is standard, documented. I'm happy to walk you through it." Hollis looked at him with the expression of a man who had expected this to go differently. "Your supervisor has been made aware of concerns regarding." "My supervisor has my report," Daniel said. "So does the city engineer's office. So does the state review board, as of this morning." A silence settled on the 4th floor, the kind that arrives when a door has been closed from the inside and the person outside has just understood that knocking will not open it. Hollis said nothing further. His team continued the inspection with somewhat less performance in their movements. Daniel stood at the edge of the floor and looked out at the city through the open construction facade, buildings and sky, and the particular angle of November light that made everything look briefly like it mattered, and waited for what came next. What came next arrived 2 hours later, not on the 4th floor, but in the parking structure below, when Daniel was loading his case into the back of his truck and a car pulled up beside him that he recognized from a sidewalk in September. The door opened. Mara stepped out, not in a coat she had grabbed, but in the specific composure of someone who had planned this stop. She was wearing what she wore when she was working, something dark, well-fitted, the watch that told him she took time seriously. Behind her, in the car, he could see the outline of someone in the back seat. "You came," he said. "I wanted to see the building," she said. "Before the stop work order goes on it tomorrow." He looked at her. "You knew about the order." "I have a conversation with the State Review Board scheduled this afternoon," she said. "I've provided them with the Whitfield Capital audit documentation. The invoice discrepancies, the procurement records, the sign-off chain. It corroborates your findings completely. They'll move fast, he said. They already are. She looked at the building's skeletal facade above them. Castellan's principal, Marcus Vane, has been cooperating with the review since Tuesday. The moment our capital withdrew, his financing structure collapsed. He had no reason left to protect the people below him who made the substitution call. Daniel was quiet for a moment. He thought about Brandt, about the certified letter, about the 3 weeks he had spent re-examining drawings he already knew were wrong, making absolutely certain he was right before he put his name on 6 pages that cost him a contract and would cost him more before it was finished. It's over, he said. The Castellan part is over, she said. The building will be remediated. The material substitution will be corrected at Castellan's expense. The contractors responsible are being referred for fraud charges. She paused. And your report, your original report, has been formally entered into the state record as the document that initiated the review. He looked at her. How formal. Formal enough that the city engineer's office called Brandt this morning to commend the quality of your work. He thought about Brandt's face in the office. The way Brandt had said Whitfield Capital like a warning. He didn't mention that when he called me. He will. Something moved in her expression, not quite amusement, but adjacent. I may have suggested to the city engineer that the inspector responsible deserved to hear it directly. He looked at the building, at the open facade, at the 4th floor that didn't match its own specifications and would now, because of 6 pages of careful work, be made to match them before anyone was permitted inside. Mara, he said. Yes. The car. There's someone in the back seat. A brief pause. My assistant. I have a board meeting in an hour. He nodded. He was about to say something else when the rear window of the car came down approximately 4 inches and a voice said, from the gap, he's taller than the photo. Daniel looked at the window. Mara closed her eyes briefly. Sophia sent her a photo, he said. It was not a question. She texted me Tuesday, Mara said. Your daughter. To say that she had finished page 32 and the cedar waxwing crest was correct now, and she thought you seemed happier lately, and was I the reason? He stared at her. I told her I wasn't sure, Mara said. She said that was a reasonable answer, and she appreciated my honesty, and she would note it. She would note it. And then she sent the photo. A pause. She said you'd be embarrassed if you knew, so she told me not to tell you. She told you not to tell me, and then told you to tell me. She said, and I'm quoting, that you needed a push, and she was the push. The ghost of something moved across Mara's face. Something warm, unguarded, the kind that appeared and disappeared quickly in someone who had learned to manage what their face did. She's not wrong. The window came down another 2 inches. His shirt is better than the photo, too, the voice from the car said. For what it's worth. Thank you, Priya, Mara said, in the voice that was not quite an instruction. The window went up. Daniel looked at the building one more time. At the 4th floor. At the steel that was wrong and would be made right because he had filed 6 careful pages and refused to let someone tell him the numbers said something different than they said. Then he looked at Mara. The board meeting, he said. In an hour. Sunday, he said. Sophia wants to show you page 32. She's been very specific about it. Something in Mara's expression settled. The specific settling of a person who has been holding something carefully and has found a place to set it down. Sunday, she said. She got back in the car. He stood in the parking structure and watched it pull away, and he thought about a message he'd sent in a hospital waiting room that hadn't tried to make anyone stay. About a woman who had waited 43 minutes for the right reason. About a building on Meridian Street. That would be what it was supposed to be, because someone had looked at the numbers without flinching. He drove home through November. The city moved around him, ordinary and particular, and full of buildings that people walked into and out of every day without knowing the names of the people who made sure they could. He thought that was all right. He had never needed the names. The stop work order went on the Meridian Street project on a Saturday morning. Daniel was at Sophia's school for the science fair when it happened, standing in front of a display board titled Birds of the Eastern Corridor, a field guide in progress, while Sophia explained to a panel of 3 judges the methodology behind her illustration technique and the importance of observing birds from below rather than at eye level. The judges were charmed. Sophia was not performing. She was simply explaining what she knew, which was how she explained everything. And the judges had the specific expression of people who have stopped looking at the clock. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at it once, the news alert, the project name, the stop work confirmation, and put it back in his pocket. "Dad," Sophia said from beside the display board, not interrupting her explanation, just noting his existence in the way she noted everything. "You did that face again." "Which face?" "The good one." He looked at her, small and serious in front of 32 pages of careful illustrations. Her hair in the braid she'd done herself because he'd been running late that morning, one ribbon slightly lower than the other. She looked like herself, completely, specifically herself. "Go back to your judges," he said. She went back to her judges. He stood against the gymnasium wall and thought about what it cost to do the right thing, and what it gave back, and how the accounting of it was always longer than you could see when you were standing in it. Mara came on Sunday. She came with no assistant, no car service, no armor beyond the particular self-possession that was simply how she moved through the world. She arrived at the apartment door at 11 in the morning and stood in the hallway with a paper bag and the look of someone who had thought carefully about what to bring and then brought the most ordinary thing available. "Coffee," she said, and something Sophia said she liked. "I asked Graciela." "You called Graciela." She was very forthcoming. He stepped back from the door. She came in. The apartment was the apartment. 3rd floor, the kitchen that smelled of coffee, the table with the crossword half done, Potato regarding the newcomer from the back of the couch with the sovereign indifference of a rescue cat who has decided the territory is his. Sophia's field guide was open on the coffee table. The shoes by the door were hers, towed off at an angle that suggested she had been moving fast when she removed them. Sophia appeared from the hallway in her socks, carrying page 32 in front of her like a document requiring formal presentation. "I fixed the crest," she said to Mara directly. "You were right about the angle." Mara took the page and looked at it. She looked at it the way she looked at everything, with genuine attention, not the performed kind. "That's the bird," she said. "That's the bird," Sophia confirmed. "The shading on the wing, secondary feathers." "I know. I'm still working on those." "Show me what you're trying." Sophia showed her. They stood in the middle of the apartment, discussing the secondary feathers of a cedar waxwing with the focused seriousness of two people who had decided this mattered, and Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway and held his coffee and did not try to name what he felt because it was the kind of thing that lost something in the naming. Later, he would tell Graciela that nothing dramatic had happened, that it had been coffee and field guide illustrations and Potato eventually consenting to be held, which he did with the specific dignity of a cat who had decided this was his choice rather than an invitation. That Sophia had asked Mara 11 questions and deemed the answer satisfactory and moved on to lunch with the complete confidence of someone whose assessment was complete. Graciela would say, "That's the most dramatic thing you've ever told me." He would think about that. The Meridian Street building was remediated over the following 6 months. The grade 36 deal came out. Grade 50 went in. The documentation, this time, matched the material. Daniel was not the inspector on the remediation. That would have been its own complication, but he drove past the site occasionally in the mornings and looked at the 4th floor from the street below, the way you look at something you know from the inside. Brandt called him in February and said, with the particular brevity of a man who finds apology uncomfortable, "The city engineer wants your name on the new commercial inspection team. Senior position. You'd supervise 3 inspectors." "That's a significant step," Daniel said. "The step was overdue," Brandt said, which, from Brandt, was the equivalent of a formal ceremony. Mara was not a person who moved quickly toward things. This was, Daniel understood, not caution but accuracy. She moved at the speed that things were actually ready for, which was sometimes faster than people expected and sometimes slower, and she did not adjust the speed for the sake of appearances. It was one of the things he recognized in her, because he recognized it in himself. The refusal to file a report that wasn't ready just because someone needed an answer today. They moved at the speed things were ready for. Sophia noted, in March, that Mara had been to the apartment 6 times and had correctly identified 4 bird species by sound from the kitchen window, which she considered significant data. 6 times is a pattern, Sophia said, over dinner, with the tone of a scientist presenting findings. Is it? Daniel said. Patterns indicate something, she said. That's what patterns are for. He looked at her across the table. The crossword was on the counter. Potato was on the chair. The field guide was on page 47 now. The cedar waxwing long since finished. The secondary feathers resolved. What do you think it indicates? He said. Sophia considered this with the seriousness she applied to all things. That you stop putting important things in a high cabinet, she said. And you're reaching for them instead. He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, going on something much larger than that, and thought about a message he'd sent from a hospital waiting room. About a woman who had waited 43 minutes for the right reason. About steel that didn't match its own specifications and the 6 pages that had made someone fix it. About all the ways the same quality. The refusal to say a thing was sound when the number showed otherwise ran through everything he had done and everything he was doing. Eat your dinner, he said. She ate her dinner. She did not need to push it. She had already said the thing, and it was in the room now, and she understood, with the patience of someone who has always known that some things reveal themselves only when you stop demanding they hurry, that this was enough. On a Sunday in April, Mara stood at the kitchen window of a 3rd-floor apartment in Bridgeton and identified a yellow warbler by its song before Sophia could name it. And Sophia turned from the window and looked at her father with an expression that contained an entire verdict. Daniel looked back at his daughter. Outside, the warbler sang. The city moved through its April morning, ordinary and specific, full of buildings that people walked in and out of every day. Full of things that were sound and things that were not yet sound, and things that someone careful was making sound quietly without announcement because that was what the work required. And in a kitchen that smelled of coffee and the particular warmth of a Sunday, with nowhere else to be, a man who had filed an honest report and raised an honest child and waited without knowing he was waiting stood beside a woman who had pulled her name off something fraudulent because the number said it was wrong, and neither of them said anything, because they were both people who understood that some things didn't need to be stated to be true. They just needed someone to show up, and then to stay. Thank you for sitting with this story all the way to the end. The people who stay for the whole story are the ones who understand it. If it moved you, the videos on your screen right now are waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come home. Quiet Kind has a story for you.